Are you ready to break free from a conventional life and achieve financial independence through your version of tiny living, but you're feeling stuck trying to figure out the money part? Does the pressure to conform to societal norms make it even more difficult to embrace an unconventional lifestyle? Well, you're in the right place. I'm Laura Lynch, host of the Less House, More Moolah podcast, where every Thursday I'll bring you captivating interviews with individuals who have successfully made the transition to tiny living. They defied expectations and are thriving in their unique lives. We'll also dive deep into industry resources to address common financial concerns on your tiny journey. Together, we'll explore the emotional and practical aspects of pursuing an alternative lifestyle. I will describe a clear framework for project planning and cash flow management. Our goal is to intentionally build financial security and make a positive impact through our alternative American dream. So gear up for an exciting and empowering journey to create a life that truly resonates with you. Let's dive into today's episode and take the first steps towards financial independence and purpose through tiny living. Well, hey, Kyle Thacker. Imagine seeing you here. Welcome to Less House, More Moolah. Super excited to share your documentary with the Less House, More Moolah podcast audience. You know, it's a really beautiful and serendipitous world we live in. I'm like scrolling through LinkedIn. Got all my hashtags set up, and I came across your documentary that you were really creating a lot of buzz around before it came out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to make sure I catch that. So the weekend that it launched on YouTube, I sat down and, watched the entire thing and thought, wow, this is a really amazing story and such an honest story. So for some background, let's start with how did you come to the schoolie life?
Yeah, well, happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on. What got me onto bus life really was a trip that I took with, at the time, my girlfriend, now my wife. But it was our first trip together to where we were like, I think we were far enough along in the relationship. We were like, let's go do something together, for a weekend. And so we went down to North Carolina, just outside of Asheville. And I've always had this mantra of like staying at tiny houses. Like I love tiny houses, which is unfortunate because I'm 6'5". So I think I was born in the wrong body, but I really love staying in tiny houses. I just loved like the creativity and that sort of thing. And so we would stay in like tree houses and just different things. And the one in North Carolina, one of the places that we stayed in two or three tiny houses that trip. It was like a 4-night trip. We did two. In like just a typical tiny house. And then there was 2 nights with the bus, which was what inspired this entire thing. So that was a little Airbnb. Yeah, it was in a tiny kind of a shorty school bus. And I remember walking in and I thought it was like a fort, for that you imagine as a kid, but it was for adults to stay in. And just the nerdy creative side of me just fell in love with it. And I remember just like laughing at night. I was like, we're in a freaking school bus right now. This is amazing. And that pretty much catapulted the entire journey for us, really.
Yeah, that's so awesome. There was an old school bus on the land that I grew up on. And
really?
It was just kind of parked back there. I don't know how long ago. And man, that really sparks your imagination. And I think so many of the folks I've talked to in tiny living really get inspired by some small living space or something in their childhood. My grandfather built me a playhouse, which was actually quite a large barn building that he stored his tractor in, but it was my playhouse. And that really gets you sort of thinking in a really impressionable age. But yeah, definitely those wonderful Airbnbs that are out there these days give people opportunity to try out this lifestyle.
Yeah, no, it's super cool.
Yeah. So tell us, you went from there, you were in that Airbnb, and then and it's Naomi, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you and Naomi decided to build out a bus. So what was it about your normal life? Because you owned a home at that time, I believe, according to the documentary. So what was it about your kind of normal path that wasn't working for you?
I've always been a big advocate for this. And it's partly actually not by design, but it was in the documentary, kind of the quote that I talk about. And I couldn't tell it to you verbatim right now, but more or less the kind of the quote and the philosophy that I live by now is that, life has its ups and downs, and you can't anchor all of your emotions to the summit of something. And so I would accomplish, something in my life that was important to me, and then I would expect to feel a certain way. So there's been very big moments in my life where I've, accomplished something, and then I'm not happy afterwards, and it was driving me kind of insane to it, a point where I'm like, I don't get it. I'm putting all this effort into stuff that I'm doing, and it's like I'm not like I think when I want to be here, and then I get there, and then I'm not where I want to be at all, at least from a happiness standpoint. So it was for me getting into a point that it was happening so often over like a decade's worth of time, just bigger things that I was working on, to where I realized something fundamentally was wrong, and with how I was approaching life. And so when I saved up all of my money, I was eating like PBJs for like, I don't know, a year and a half, doing nothing after work, just trying to save as much money as possible. I think I got like 10 grand or something like that. And I put all that money down on a house back when the housing market was somewhat decent as opposed to now. But I was able to get a house. And that was like the moment that I realized that I was like this, because I got the house and I was like, my gosh, I'm a homeowner. This is crazy. I feel so young. I don't feel like I should be here, but I have it. And my sister was 3 years older than me, and she didn't have one. So it's like the competitive brother sister thing. But it just, after just a few weeks, I was like, this doesn't mean anything. My day to day is not doing well. And so, for me, doing the bus trip, it was almost like I was searching for something at the time. I think I had an idea of what happiness was, and I just wanted to chase it. And so the fundamental start of the trip, and me going for it and building the bus with Naomi, and going through that 2-year arduous process of building that bus out, and then taking a huge chance, was really about staying in the norm and doing what other people thought was good for me, and what was going to impress coworkers, family members, girlfriend's parents, all the things outside of myself. I realized none of that was making me happy. And so I wanted to do it for me. And so although it wouldn't make sense to anybody, I was just going to do it anyway. And then slowly throughout the documentary, you see that like, it was about kind of the journey through it all. It was about listening to my own intuition, listening to what makes me happy, and not paying attention to the outside noise. And I think that we're in a society, I know we're in a society where we're like that, where the validation of others is a huge thing, especially with the invention of social media. So I think being the generation that grew up with it, and like kind of like, I think the millennials are like the OGs of social media, because we grew up back in the Friendster and MySpace days and stuff. And it's just like, that's been my entire life that I've known is social structure in that way. And so I disagree with it. I don't like social media. If I wasn't in tune with a lot of the work I do and something that I need, then I wouldn't do it. But that was really the start of long story short, that's the start of why we went on the trip and why we did all this, was just start listening to our own intuition and not listening to others.
Yeah. And that's a theme that I hear from so many different people, is that they just come to a point where they've done the thing that they think they're supposed to do, and they followed all the rules, and they went and got the college degree, and they bought the house or whatever. And then they go, wow, this is not all that it is cracked up to be. And there's so many other parts of myself that I haven't figured out yet. Right. So what a great way to sort of explore that in a way where, maybe and I know you and I touched on this when we talked a little bit before about certainly the costs of traveling in the bus aren't particularly low, but at least you don't have a mortgage, that you have to worry about every month. And so maybe that gives you just a little bit more freeness at that moment to explore yourself and what's most important to you, and reset your mindset for where you want to go next.
Yeah. And I think it's important to acknowledge too, that when we sold the houses at the height of the market before, like during COVID, when it was going pretty high. And so when we found out what we could make on the house, that gave us the insurance blanket that we needed. So it was a huge risk giving away everything that we own, selling the house, and just going on this trip. It's like, what if a month from now the house, or, the bus blows up? Like, I don't know. And so that was a huge factor in the whole thing. It was like, is this going to work? Is it not? But I think it's important to acknowledge all these like details, because acting like this is, a stress-free lifestyle, or there's no risk involved, or it's just very easy to accomplish. It's like, well, we had a house and we sold it, and we had a nice little nest egg in case things went wrong. And so I think it's irresponsible for people on YouTube, and I see this a lot with van life and bus life and these type of things where you try to make it look as cool and easy breezy as possible, but there are a lot of ups and downs. And so you mentioned, the honesty and vulnerability in the documentary. That was by design because I didn't want to be a hypocrite of the things that I actually don't like. It's irresponsible of me to project an image of what this is and make somebody else do the same thing or influence them do the same thing. And then they don't realize what they signed up for, because people are responsible for the message that they give to others. And so that was a big reason. And I want to be clear though, like we had a house, we sold it, and we had a nest egg in case things went wrong. Luckily, we never had to do that. And so it's not like it's a guaranteed financial disaster if you go out. It wasn't for us. We actually finished our documentary / bus trip. We finished that. And the entire trip was free. The entire trip was free from the profit we made on the bus when we sold it. And so from an economic standpoint, it worked out for us, but I want to be clear that for some people it's not. And that's just the way it goes. You got to be smart and hopefully, be strategic about how you do things and protect yourself, and don't just do something that's wildly irresponsible. Make sure that it's calculated and that you're going to be okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And everything in life is about, trade-offs. And, sometimes it seems like, and this is, kind of coming at you from left field here or as a contrary point, like we feel like home ownership is so safe in some ways. But as we learned through the pandemic, it's very easy for people for your home to be a big risk too. Yeah. And when you have all of your sort of eggs in that one basket and you're having to take care of that really high housing cost, that can create significant risk for folks too. So breaking down in a schoolie is certainly a risk, but so is buying more house.
No, I agree. It's about mitigating risk, right? And so what's a bigger risk? Owning a home, in the general sense of, especially now. I mean, I have a friend that just bought a house and I pray everything's okay. But if it's not, I mean, that's a huge, huge, huge investment, as opposed to buying a $10,000 school bus and fixing it up. I mean, there's risk in everything, but there's definitely less risk in the tiny house moving, because what we were doing was traveling every single day, and we were going on adventures and spending everything that, we were making on the road as we worked. And so it wasn't about saving money, but it was also about like, what's the worst that can happen? The bus blows up and we're still okay, because it's not like our house, our house that was worth, I don't know how many more times than what the bus was. It would be more painful if that happened. So yeah, I think there's just different ways to look at it for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Life is about risk and trade-offs and analyzing the risk reward potential on any particular action. And I think people don't necessarily think through the risks of home ownership and many other things, because we just follow this default path, right? And so understanding that everything, should be thought through, and certainly taking off in a school bus and, traveling and, how that plays out in your job, and all of that is interesting complexities that are different, and you have to think through those. So, one of the things that I like to, promote is the idea of build your own, because I feel like that's where your biggest bang for your buck, sweat equity, confidence building. I really, my tiny house was, built by my own two hands, and, my husband's too. And I feel like that building that tiny house taught me that I can pretty much do anything, because you one day at a time, you just go chip it away at that goal, and it just teaches you about goal achievement. So tell us, how did you figure out how to build your bus, and where would you point others who are considering a DIY build?
Yeah, great question. And I'm pretty passionate about this answer too, because it kind of goes down the theme of, you got to know what you're signing up for. Some people are more inclined to pick things up like this. They have a natural ability to build things. I would not say that Naomi or I are either one of those things. We did as much as we could. We YouTubed, we did, but there's some things that we're like, you know what? We just don't have the tools for that. We don't have this, we don't have that. And so it was having a very logical mindset about what can we accomplish and what can we not. And so we did as much as we could. But if you'll notice in the documentary that when we got the bus, it already had a roof raise done to it. And so being 6'5", I was like, I love tiny, but I also have to live in here comfortably. And so The Yates family out of Vicksburg, Mississippi had a bus that had a 25-inch roof raise, and they're very, very, I believe it's been a while now, either an architect, I think he's an engineer or maybe an architectural engineer. I don't know. But you could tell that they were very good at what they did, and it was very well done. And I messaged them, and I actually got that bus with the roof raise under $5,000 at the time. I couldn't believe when they accepted it. It was almost one of those things where it was like, all right, I'm going to drive down there. Is there anything actually wrong with the bus? Because you just said that you would, I almost was lowballing, but at the time it was all I could afford. And truthfully, we took out a $5,000 loan just to get the bus. That we had very little. We had a lot of money in the house, but we didn't have a lot of money just in the savings. We had a lot going on at that time in our life, so that was also like a financial kind of risk. But what we did was over the course of 2 years was pay as we went. So we couldn't do the roof raise because we didn't have the skill set, but we found one like that, and so that was a huge blessing from the get go. Then we did subfloors. We did a lot of the plumbing, insulation, a lot of cosmetic work. But then it got to a point where we were going to spend more time learning or saving up for tools or things that we needed to where it's like we can do that or we can find somebody. And so there's a guy named Carl. I don't know if he does this anymore. We probably drove him out of business because we were always pestering him over stuff. So, but it was PMK West Conversions. And so it was down in Columbus, Indiana. And so we would drive down there. And so I tell people that if you don't feel like you can do something in regards to the build, and we did a lot of it, but there were so many things towards the end, in the middle and the end that he helped us with because he just had more time. He could do this full time. We were paying him, but I am also a filmmaker. That's pretty obvious. But I do camera work and stuff, and I do a lot of wedding videography. And so I was like, if I spent my energy getting wedding videos and wedding gigs, and then I make, let's say $8,000 doing a few weddings, and then I take that money and then I pay Carl to help me do the stuff that I know technically it would take me 6 years or 6 months to a year to like figure out how to do, and I know he'll do it right. I was like, how do you channel your energy? How do you channel what you're going to do? And so I utilized and outsourced quite a few things because I knew I was good at turning around video work, and I could do that more effectively for my time. And so I think there's a lot of pride in doing it yourself, and I think that's a great thing if you're able to, and if you have the time and the resources and the land and the tools to do it. But it's no reason to give up if you feel like you're overwhelmed. You can always find a new way to do it, and there's no shame in saying you didn't do the whole thing yourself. That's some people are very prideful in that, and I respect why they are. But just because you can't saw a bus in half and do a roof raise doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and live in a bus because you can't. You just got to be smart about how you allocate your time and your money.
Yeah, that's so good. There are certainly, things that are easier to learn and, certain tools that are easier to come by and other things that maybe it's better to bring in a specialist, someone that has that capability and that skill set. To your point, right? It's kind of basics of economics, right? To focus on making money where you can do it the most efficiently, and then, hopefully pay somebody who can be very efficient with their time too. So tell us what you learned about yourself through that process.
I learned a lot of patience and forgiveness for myself. I'm a pretty intense person when it's something that I'm passionate about. And so having the humility to realize that you can't do everything was something that I definitely learned through the build process. Patience was a big one we get asked all the time when we were living in the bus, like, did you guys want to kill each other? And I was like, no. As living on the bus from a mental health or a relationship health standpoint was pretty easy. I mean, we have a great foundation and we have a great marriage. And so, and also you can't, if you get in an argument, you can't go off to the bar with your buddies. You can't go in the basement and get away from them or go out to the yard. You live in a small house together. And so it's like, I was like, actually for a relationship standpoint, it was perfect because if you're in an argument, you're like, well, we got to figure this out because it's going to be a miserable time for both of us if we don't. But we learned throughout the build process, to get back to your question, was that was tough because there are things that we both didn't know. And it's frustrating when you don't understand everything and you're trying to both figure it out. And so she makes a suggestion and I was like, I don't think that's it. And she's like, well, do you have a better idea? I'm like, no, I don't. I just don't think that's right. So when we survived the 2-year build process together, I was like, our marriage can last through anything. That's probably the biggest takeaway that I got from building a bus is patience.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think as I mentioned before, that my biggest takeaway was just like anything can be accomplished if you just,
Yeah.
keep at it, right? You just keep at it a little bit at a time.
That was the thing, was like, we got into, really rough spots where we didn't know how to get through it, but it was just like not giving up. That was the big thing. It's like just figuring out another way to do things and get it done. And so, yeah, I'm super proud of people that build it all themselves. I'm proud of people that acknowledge who, if they can't or they don't have the resources. And so it's, there's a lot of takeaways, but yeah, empowering and feeling empowered from just getting it done, whether you did every last thing yourself, is something I agree with you. After we got that done, I'm like, man, if we can build a bus, then we can also travel the country and we can do whatever. And that's what we did.
Yeah, so good. So there's this beautiful scene in your documentary where, you all close on the house and you put the trash out and you drive away. And I just wonder, like, what was the feeling like that you had on that day?
Oh man. It was nerve wracking. But it was also, we intentionally did it this way where we talked up what we were going to do to everybody and anybody. So when it got to the moment where you had to go or not, it's like you had to, because you already spoke it into existence. And so it was, I kind of have like the F it mentality. It's like, just screw it. Like, let's just, we're already in, let's go. I personally, like, some would call that reckless. I think it's calculated recklessness. I also just think it's not living an ordinary, boring life. And so it was kind of like where I knew that, like, I was like, I have no idea what's going to happen. Right. The second we drove away from the house, it was like, we have an idea of what's going to happen, but we have no idea if this heater is going to work tonight. We're going to be freezing. Like, we have no idea. But it was kind of like, just screw it, F it. Like, let's go for it. And we'll figure it out along the way. The connection between Naomi and I, and just knowing that we'll figure this out together. Because I didn't mind failing. What I didn't want to happen was fail Naomi and put her or my dog or somebody, just put us in a situation that's not happy or good. So there's the fear of that, but also the screw it, let's do it. We got this. We're in it together. Let's go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great relationship lesson through the build. And then, going off on this path, like, you really are interdependent and also have learned so much about each other and how to work together and how much each other is capable. I mean, I remember the scene where Naomi's like, prying those, big heavy rubber stairs out of the bus. And I'm like, well, there's a crowbar capability, which will take you really far in life, right? With the crowbar. So yeah, you learn like the strength and resilience of each other. And then you have a lot of trust in each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So now I'm so curious, why is it that as you got, and certainly, you had been filming as a profession, but when kind of did the idea occur to you, hey, I should turn this into a documentary? And why did you feel so compelled to document this journey?
That's a good question. So I didn't know that it was going to be a documentary until we had the bus. And at that time, I was also just like, I was flirting with the idea of it. I know I wanted to do it, but I also didn't know. I made a promise to myself that we're going to finish this bus no matter what. And I 90% believed myself that I would do that. But like actually committing to like a full on documentary was about 90% too. But like in the beginning of the film where it's me at work and then you see the North Carolina trip, those parts of this, I had no idea a documentary was happening. The work stuff was done for internal things. And it was just about promoting that we support real estate companies or real estate agencies in the markets that we serve. And we wanted to show that sort of thing. And so that was just footage that we had and that was taken. And then the trip to North Carolina right after that in the documentary was, I had heard a song by JR, which is in there, which nowadays you can't even do because it's copyrighted, but I think I got grandfathered in. So like that video, probably if JR listens to this podcast, he'd be like, hey, we should take that down. But I made that short little vacation clip just because I heard that song. And I was like, and then there's a part where it goes, I can feel you, boom, 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 boom. And like the beat, and I'm like, what if that was a clip every half second? And so the way my mind works, I was like, man, if we go on this trip and we do all these hikes and stuff, I just want to make it cool. I want to make it fun. And we could just, have this as a memory. So that was when we found the school bus and all that. I had no idea we were making a documentary. And then the coming weeks after that, when I went into crazy mode and started researching and doing everything I could to figure out more about this lifestyle, that's when we actually got the loan for the bus and drove down there and picked it up. That was the moment where I was like, this is either going to be a YouTube channel or it's going to be a documentary or maybe both. And so that's kind of how I figured, once we took off on the trip, I knew a documentary was happening, but it was also like the YouTube subscriber stuff wasn't necessarily for me because there's a million van and bus life people that do that. And I wanted to make a piece of art. I wanted to make a story of inspiration, the whole look at me subscriber model, although there's nothing wrong with that. A ton of people make a living off of it. I just couldn't do it. I was like, because I wasn't enjoying what I was doing. It's like, I want to film, but not think about like 3 days from now, I got to turn it around for people. It's like, I want to do that after the trip is over because I want to enjoy what I'm doing now. Still want to film, just don't want to produce stuff every week. That sounded exhausting and kind of not what we wanted out of the trip.
Mm-hmm. And so when you decided that you were making this art project for after the fact, what was the message that you think that was kind of, calling to you? What did you think a larger audience needed to know?
I wanted people to see what was capable. If you really put your head down and do something and live for yourself as opposed to others. That was kind of the main message. And it was really about educating people on bus life because we fell in love with bus life and we wanted people to understand that. Tried to make the documentary as realistic as possible to show the steps and how we got there and the struggles that we had to show that, hey, you don't have to be this master craftsman. You don't have to, that was the main goal with the documentary. But as most documentaries do, when you film them, they change over time and the stories change. And so it really ended up about halfway through with kind of like the revelation of not anchoring your emotions to the summit and showing the Grand Canyon, Yosemite, and we wanted to go to Banff, Canada. We didn't quite make it there, but it's like, we wanted to do all these things, but it ended up being a story about Naomi and I. So although it's called Schoolie and it's about tiny house living and what you can do with it and the kind of the adventures you can have that no matter what stage of life you're in, it ended up being a story about my wife and I. And so I didn't know it was going to be that way, but it just turned out to be. And I'm happy it did.
Yeah, it's amazing the way that the creative product that you're creating can sort of take its own life and, and teach you about something about your story. What a beautiful process. So you and I already kind of touched on this, but you were very authentic and, telling your story and what you went through on an emotional journey on that documentary. And as you clearly pointed out, we're very much in an image-focused culture, and everybody's focused on only showing the best version of themselves. As an example, I have chickens, and the chicken photos that I see on Instagram are not representative of reality. So share with us kind of a little bit more about what your intent is there about being so authentic on screen.
A lot of it has to do with me and my own mental health. I put on an image for my entire adult life up until, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Again, being brought up in the social structure of MySpace and the beginnings of Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff, is that social validation at an early age is everything. And that's the case for everybody at all stages, not just my generation, but, acceptance at that age, sitting at the cool table at lunch and all that stuff. That's what you care about. And so I think for me, I led a life of trying to project an image that wasn't me because of the expectations of society around me. And then I was going further and further down into a deep depression because I wasn't living my own truth. And so when I finally, and this helped a lot when I met Naomi, is like she was the first person that I dated where I gave her a real honest version of me from the get-go, which I myself wasn't proud of. And I expected her to walk away from me because I had just had a lot of issues. I was, drinking too much. I was just not leading a life that was desirable probably for somebody to be around. And so I wasn't even happy about what I was doing. I was just kind of floating through life. And I was like, I had to dissect what all that meant and why I felt so poorly. And I used to just think that it was my situation, or I wanted to be here, go to that summit, and then I'm going to feel differently. But really, it was just the day-to-day processes of who I am. And so what I realized, that if I wasn't blatantly honest with myself, and that also meant my projection of what, the messages that I put out there, movies that I make, if I'm not exactly who I am, then I'm not going to be happy with myself. And so I used to be ashamed of that stuff, and now showing real raw emotion and vulnerability, that's because I do feel that way, and I do get emotional a lot. And I'm more emotional than most men, but I do feel like I've had a lot of friends of mine come up to me and talk to me about this stuff. And I have a lot more friends that open up to me more than they probably opened up to others, because they know that they can trust me. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And so with the film, it was really about me having a distaste for what that style of representation online causes. If there anybody's like me, I would imagine they feel that way because they know it's a lie. They know it's not exactly. And so you're not getting true, honest validation from people, or you're not getting true, honest feedback or criticism from people. You're getting fake everything. And so for me, it was really about wanting to not be a hypocrite, and follow the same path, because you want it to look as cool as possible and show your amazing trip. But also it's like, you're further perpetuating a system that you disagree with. And so I personally have a better mental health. I just have better mental health now, because if somebody doesn't like me for who I am, if I'm too emotional, if I'm too this, I'm too that, then I'm actually excited about it, because I'm like, then I'm not going to put any energy into having a relationship with you. And so the people that I used to think were like the cool people, I've actually, you look at the executives of companies, and they're great people. But are they the people that I should be around, or something like that? And it's not. It's, I've had some people, society would judge somebody that lives in a bus. I'm like, those people are awesome. They're the nicest, kindest people. And those are the people I want to surround myself with. And those people are more raw and real and emotional and vulnerable and all that stuff. So I just wanted to show that you don't have to be perfect to do things. You don't have to, there's just so many, if you're not going to show rawness, then everybody's raw watching. So why would you not be the raw one presenting? It just doesn't make sense not to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so good. And it takes it just takes life beating you up enough to realize that you're acting out inauthentically, and that you're living inauthentically, and you're not being your true self. And yet always we're expected to hide our own voice and to conform to, whatever situation you're in, or company that you're in, or family relationships that you're in. And so people, generally speaking, stay on the surface, and they don't allow themselves to really explore what's going on deep inside them. And then they end up feeling isolated. We have a, sort of chronic problem in our country around people feeling isolated and disconnected, even though we're all more connected than ever before, because we don't have those authentic connections that we are yearning for, because we don't have authentic conversations, which is, for listeners, why this podcast is never about composting toilets. It's always about personal growth topics, because these authentic connections are so valuable and so important for our mental well-being.
Agreed.
So share with me, what do you think is, and I'm going to, change it up here a little bit and ask, what was the biggest mental health benefit for you of going tiny?
Oh, definitely the less is more philosophy. It took us 2 or 3 rounds of purging stuff that we had, and we didn't have a ton of stuff. So I can't imagine, I'm thinking of friends and people I know that have just a boatload of things. And it took 3 rounds of purging, because there's things where I'm like, oh, I might want to hold on to that. And then the second round, I'm like, you think you get a little further down. You're like, I don't need that. I don't need that. When am I ever? I haven't used that thing in 5 years. Why do I need it? Like, is there an emotional value to it? You just kind of go through these like reasonings. And then the second one, and then, it got done. I think I had 2 pairs of shorts, 6 t-shirts or something, a pair of shoes, hiking shoes, my poles, and then my camera gear, and like my laptop. And that was it. That's all I owned. And life is so much more beautiful when you don't have all those things, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what brand of shirt you have. It doesn't matter like if you have the newest iPhone, like can you make phone calls? Can you do this stuff? I mean, there's certain things that you want to have the nicest things in because it's like your hobby or something, then that's totally fine. But the minimalism lifestyle was such a transformative thing for me. And just, you don't have to worry about money as much. You don't have to worry about where you're putting stuff. How are you getting everything home? It's just, life's so much better when you have less. And I see people with just a bajillion things and they're usually the most unhappy because they have more stuff to think about. Simplicity is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I love that. So have you identified kind of what is a biggest challenge that you see for people that are, I'm sure you've talked to a lot of people that are curious about what you've done in your documentary. What's the biggest challenge about making that change in your life and going tiny in whatever format?
Outside of just like a challenge from the inner self of like thinking about what's going tiny. I would say that it's really about, you have to want to do it first and foremost from like a very practical like standpoint. I feel like you want to do it because of it's got to be a very clear reason of why you want to do it. If you just think it's fun, then yeah, doing an Airbnb and trying it out for a few days to see if it works. But I think that the transition is not having a strong grasp on more. I think we're raised to like, the bigger the house, the better, the faster the car, the newer the car, all that stuff. And then I don't know, if you just get to a mindset where it's not that important to you and you realize, or you get there's a lot of things that I got there with, and I'm like, and you realize it doesn't bring you happiness. Well, then you start to reduce things. You just start to find owning a bigger home doesn't make me happy. What if I went smaller? Because that would allow more time for me to do this and that. So I just think I'm in that mindset of like less is more. And it doesn't mean that you're just getting everything less in life. And you're like, I'm not going to eat as much pizza, and I love pizza, or I'm not going to have as much house. I can't play movies like I want to in my house because I don't have a movie theater room. It's like, if none of that stuff, if you realize that stuff's not that important to you, it's very easy to transition to a tiny life. And you can use all your additional resources and capital for other stuff that you enjoy. I just think it's having a healthy mindset about exactly what you want and how you want to do it. Because there's, as I would imagine, there's 500 different routes you can take going tiny. You can do it for a week, you can do it for a year, you can do it full time, you can travel, lots of stuff.
Yeah. And so you only did it for a season. So how have the lessons that you learned and the lifestyle change and the mental health change and all of that, how did they impact your world today?
It's definitely like the philosophy and the lifestyle that we had has not changed. We're definitely more removed from all the noise. When you spend a month in the woods with each other and nothing else, it's a beautiful thing. And you realize how amazing simplicity is, and just having a fire and not having to spend money to, like, why would you ever go to a bar and spend $100 again, Kyle? Like, why would you ever do that? And you just think. So I think like just the lifestyle of it all this season really helped us going forward, is where we are in a house again. But we didn't buy into a house that we couldn't afford. It's the same size, if not a little smaller than our last house. And it's just I think the minimalism and the simplicity. And so like we're scheming all these ways to travel now about how we can do more things. I've mentioned the idea of getting a van and doing the East Coast here soon. We'll see if that happens. But yeah, it's just kind of made like all the big problems go away, and just, we think very simplistically. And that's been a huge mental health boost for us because you don't have all that clutter in your head.
Yeah. And how has this experience informed your perception of financial security, financial independence? We talked about risk a little bit earlier. How did your sort of financial framework change based on that experience?
Yeah, it hasn't changed too much, because I've always been very diligent with money. Every morning, the first thing I do is check my app, my Chase app, which is probably unhealthy, but I do that just to see where I'm at, because I always want to know. But it definitely, what do you spend your money on? I think it's important to save. You don't want to just live, recklessly, because if you don't have insurance and you break your arm, you're screwed. You want to be smart about how you do things. But I do think that always making sure that you're having money to treat yourself, to do adventures, because you have no idea whether you'll live another day or two. It happens all the time, especially as you get older. You have friends that pass away, you have parents and things like that. So understanding that you only get one shot at it. So be smart with your money, save. And the best way to do that is to not spend your money on stuff that doesn't matter. And then so you're able to save up more. And if you want to go to Alaska and explore things and let's say you love taking pictures of birds, then go to Alaska and take pictures of bald eagles. Like, financially, having the mindset of like fun is definitely a big priority, but also being smart about it. Just not just spending everything you got. That's never a good idea. You probably have fun doing it, but it's probably not the smartest.
Sure. Yeah, good. I think that there's just so many different threads that we can pull on the benefits of taking a time out from, sort of the prescribed path that we all got set on, and taking a time out and, spending some time in nature and, in a schoolie, and, spending some time with someone that you really want to get to know really well, and checking out from social media and understanding what you actually need to have on a daily basis to survive. I think that really helps frame a reset. And you've described all of that really beautifully for us, and, helped us see that through the documentary as well. So thanks for sharing that with the world. I think that everyone will appreciate so much seeing your perspective on that, and also your sense of what's capable, that, what you can do if you put your mind to something that may be completely new for you, what can be done. Hopefully people will feel really encouraged by your story. So Kyle, thank you so much for joining me. And of course, make sure that you take a moment and share with the audience. I know you don't want to be found in too many places, but where might they find your film?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. For now, we're in a bunch of film festivals, and there's maybe a point where it goes on a streaming service. We don't know, but I wanted to make sure that everybody could watch it for free, for now at least. And so that's on Shutter Speed, just like a camera, Shutter Speed, go figure. The Schoolie, Skoolie. So if you look on YouTube, Shutter Speed, the Schoolie, and then the documentary is just called all caps Schoolie official documentary. So you'll see a thumbnail picture of my wife and I on top of our bus at Crater Lake. It's an hour and 43 minutes. It shows the full process from idea, inception, building, and the trip. And so if you're interested in the lifestyle, there's a lot of ways to do it, but you could watch the way we did it. And I encourage everybody to watch and do it, because it's a lot of fun, and we don't regret anything, for sure.
Awesome. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for sharing it with us. And thanks for being on the podcast today.
Yes, thank you so much. I really had a good time.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Less House, More Moolah. To access valuable financial tips and resources tailored to your tiny living journey, join our exclusive community at thetinyhouseadvisor.com. Here you'll find a supportive network of like-minded individuals committed to helping each other navigate the challenges and celebrate the victories of embracing a minimalist lifestyle. So don't miss out on the opportunity to be part of this empowering tribe. Be sure to tune in next Thursday for another insightful episode of Less House, More Moolah, where we'll continue to explore practical solutions and inspiring stories to help you create the life you've always dreamed of.
Please see the show notes for important disclosure regarding the Tiny House Advisor LLC and this episode.